We are ready to, excuse me, reconvene the 140th meeting of the Mass Gaming Commission at somewhere close to 1 o'clock. And we are to agenda item 5, Research and Responsible Gaming, Director Vanderlinden.
Good afternoon.
Good afternoon.
So this item is discussing and recommendation for play management. I'm going to give you just a brief overview of play management, the issue, kind of the process or background that we've gone through, and then followed by my recommendations. A key element of the Massachusetts Gaming Commission Responsible Gaming Framework is Strategy 2, Supporting Informed Player Choice, which sets out measures to support players' efforts to responsibly manage their gambling. The basis of informed player choice is that patrons should have access to all the necessary information and available resources to make gambling decisions. This includes such things as facts about how games work and the probability of winning, but it should also include information about players' own behavior, thus allowing them to understand their playing behavior in real time. Section 2.2 of that same, of Section 2 in Play Information and Management Systems describes specific tools to implement this strategy, and it includes the ability for players to set limits on money and time spent gambling. This is also referred to as play management tools or limit-setting tools. So the issue is that the Commission must decide whether to require gaming licensees to offer voluntary limit-setting tools as part of a play management system. And if yes, then what are the features that should be included to provide the greatest benefit? So as background, the Massachusetts Gaming Commission Responsible Gaming Framework was adopted by the Commission on September 25th. One measure, whether to require play management tools, remained unresolved until there was further investigation of incorporating play management tools into the development of regulations. So at this point, I believe that we are through the investigation point, and I'm going to provide with you a summary of all the process that we went through to do this investigation and then the conclusions of each element. So first is a review of the research, and the method that we used, we went through an exhaustive review of research, including theory and evaluation of play management tools. The conclusion is that really, honestly, definitive evidence of the effectiveness based on empirical research is inconclusive. There are two overarching reasons why this is the case. First, literature is focused on the play management practices of problem gamblers rather than on recreational gamblers who may want to set limits in order to maintain safe levels of gambling. The second, empirical research to date has struggled with expansive methodological flaws, dealing with sample sizes, methodology in terms of what they were trying to measure, contamination of gambling types, so on and so forth. A second way in which we tried to investigate this issue was engagement with our licensees. Play management tools have been discussed in numerous times in meetings of the Massachusetts Partnership for Responsible Gaming. In July 2014, a facilitated meeting was dedicated to the topic to ensure a detailed understanding of the concerns of our applicants and licensees and recommendations from researchers in the field. And finally, last month, WIN, MGM, and PIN shared both written and verbal positions on the issue. The conclusion is that throughout the process of developing the Responsible Gaming Framework, our licensees have been fully invested. Their successful experience as operators in numerous other jurisdictions cannot be overlooked even in this issue. Each has expressed a commitment to promote responsible gaming at their Massachusetts gaming establishment. I've seen this demonstrated through the process of developing the Responsible Gaming Framework, as well as through the applications that they submitted even to obtain a gaming license. They have shared concerns, but they have also expressed a willingness to test the system to see what measurable benefit can come from it. In testimony during the last meeting on November 20th, and in written comment, each presented a recommendation on how to effectively introduce a play management system without unreasonably interfering with the gaming experience of most patrons. Many of those recommendations I've tried to incorporate in one form or another into my final recommendation. Next is we've received input from product, hardware, and software manufacturers. I had focused conversations regarding the cost and feasibility of play management tools with companies that offered operator-based solutions for this. The conclusion is that the specific cost to implement and maintain a system is difficult to determine, but it does not appear cost prohibitive. Early adopters of play management systems did pay a high cost to build new technology from scratch and retrofit hardware and software to existing gaming management systems. But since that time, technologies have become increasingly effective and cost efficient, which would likely benefit Massachusetts if play management tools are adopted. We received input from other stakeholders aside from our licensees. The Massachusetts Gaming Commission solicited public comment following the presentation of the final draft of the Responsible Gaming Framework, as well as specific to play management. Input was received from persons representing Massachusetts communities, the industry other than our licensees, academic and research institutions, and advocacy groups. Overall, the support or opposition to play management tools was mixed, but such input that they received was included in the process and factored into the overall and detailed recommendations. Finally, we worked with Strategic Science to review the experience of other jurisdictions that had experience in implementing play management tools. New Zealand, Canada, Norway, Sweden, and Australia were selected based on available documentation, relevance to Massachusetts, and willingness to disclose information about their process. A summary of the findings and the recommendations from Strategic Science was delivered at the meeting in October of 2014. Conclusion is that the report created by Strategic Science, and it was called Informing Play Management Systems, an International Review of Limit-Setting Tools, provides a compelling case to adopt play management tools in Massachusetts. Their primary recommendation was as follows. The Massachusetts Gaming Framework should include play management tools that encourage players to set limits of time, money, and support players to maintain those limits. Strategic Science provided further detailed recommendations to address key considerations of successful implementation of play management tools, and many of these recommendations as well have been incorporated into my final recommendations. Which comes to my recommendation regarding play management tools. I recommend that the Massachusetts Gaming Commission include limit-setting options as part of a play management system. To promote the greatest benefit in reducing gambling-related harm, I recommended the following detailed recommendations. 1, play management tools should allow patrons to pre-commit to an amount spent per gaming session or day, as well as or per month. Number 2, play management tools are mandatory for licensees to offer on all electronic gaming machines. Number 3, play management tools are voluntary for players to use. Number 4, the use of play management tools are incentivized at enrollment and periodically thereafter for continued use.
Mark, are you going to go through all of these? Because I had questions along some of them.
I was planning on just reading through the recommendations, and I know
go ahead.
that there's
We'll
several
go through
questions,
one.
but however you would
No, I
like
think
to.
let's finish it off, and then we'll go back through one by one.
Okay. Play management tools provide pop-up reminders on the screen of electronic gaming machine at 60, 90, and 100% of the limit. Play management tools are seamlessly integrated as a feature of the licensee's player reward or loyalty card system. Licensees will work closely with the Massachusetts Gaming Commission to develop marketing strategies to maximize the uptake and use of play management tools. Patrons can enroll or change their limits from multiple locations, including all electronic gaming machines, customer service stations, on-site responsible gaming information center, self-service kiosks, and or the player reward portal of the company's website. Number 9, when signing up for a player a new player account with a casino, the patron will be required to decide whether or not to use the play management tool. Number 10, the system will provide periodic checks for patrons who decline to use the play management tool to set limits. Number 11, limit setting tools are coordinated with other tools of the play management system, such as the cost of play messaging, monthly statements of gaming activity as required in Chapter 23K, Section 29, a brief problem gambling assessment tool, tips on responsible gaming, educational quizzes, and information on how to access assistance. Number 12, play management tools are flexibly designed to allow changes to the limits. Decreases will take effect immediately. Increases will be subject to a 24-hour cooling off period. Number 13, when a player reaches the preset limits, the following steps are reinforce the limit. The session is interrupted and the player informed that he or she has reached the limit. The player must actively acknowledge the message in order to continue gambling. If the player continues to play in excess of the limit, the session is interrupted with an informative message at time intervals of every 15 minutes. The player would have to actively acknowledge the message in order to continue gambling. Consequences for exceeding limits include foregoing any loyalty points for that play. Number 14, play management tools are operator-based for each licensee. And number 15, the play management tools are designed on a platform that allows for thorough and rigorous evaluation and continuous improvement.
Let me suggest an approach here. I think that we're going to want to go through this item by item. I'm going to suggest that what we first of all do is decide from a sense of the group whether we are going to adopt a play management system of some sort. If the answer to that is yes, then I suggest we go through each of the features that Mark has proposed one by one and make a consensus decision on each of them. Does that make sense?
Yeah, that's fine with me, but I have some questions about the memorandum before we get to the features. They're not,
Is it before we get to the question of do we want to do this at all?
No.
It's at that question, okay.
no, it's after that, but.
Oh, it's after.
but, I mean, I'm perfectly happy to decide whether we are in general agreement that we ought to have a play management system. But then before we go to those specific recommendations, the specific steps, contents of the system, I have some questions about the content of the memorandum.
Fine.
To me, it's a depends. There are some features here that I need to understand better. I'd like to. In a couple of them in the present form make me wonder as to whether we should have one or not. And so I would flip it, a play management system or not. So I was actually going to ask on some of these features and suggest that maybe we decide after the consensus document emerges, if that's the case.
Well, it sounds like under certain circumstances, you would
Yes.
agree that there should be.
Yeah.
So, and that's all I think we're all saying. Are there circumstances under which we would agree that we want to have a play management system? And for me, the answer is yes, there are. Sounds like the answer is yes for you.
Yep.
If the answer is yes for at least another person of us, then I think then we're ready to start going through the particulars. Whether we will end up having the features that cause us to want to say yes remains to be seen. But there are circumstances under which we would agree to this.
Right.
Yes.
Okay,
Yes.
okay. Commissioner Stebbins?
Yes.
Okay. So you had some general,
I had some questions as to features of the memorandum, and I've had a long discussion with Mark yesterday, so none of this will come as a surprise to Mark. Some questions about features of the memorandum before we get to the recommendations.
okay. Well, I don't know whether this is before or after. I just want to, there's a couple things I want to say about my conditional yes. That you do say it when you talk about the licensees having all three agreed somewhat reluctantly, but definitely, to be willing to collaborate with us on a test. And what I'm buying into, what I'm prepared to buy into is that under the certain circumstances, depending on which features we come up with, we will try this out. And we have to figure out how long that means. We have to figure out a whole bunch of things. But it is a decision to try this out. Consistent with your cautionary method of designing. We don't have good data that we can really rely on about whether this is going to be good or bad, but it sounds kind of reasonable and it's worth a try. So that's item number one. I'm saying yes, I'm willing to go along with this as long as it is a thoughtful test to figure out what are the true costs, what are the true benefits, and is it worth it? That's number one. And number two, and you would sort of imply this in your 14th and 15th point, that the data has to be in a way that it can be evaluated, but I would not want to go forward here until the research project is established. You know, we need to figure out how are we going to evaluate the costs and the benefits of this? Who's going to do it? What do they need? And that needs to be teed up before we go forward. And then the third thing, sort of implied in your points, but it was very explicit from Penn National, who has been, you know, gracious enough or foresighted enough to be willing to be the test bed. They made it very clear that they want the technology to be truly debugged before it starts. And maybe that means we can't start at the beginning of when they open. Hopefully it means we can do it when they open. But the parameter is, it's only fair to Penn National to make sure that it's really debugged before we start. So with those three conditions, I say yes, there are certain features under which I would go forward. Everybody agree with those?
Absolutely. Actually, I was going to get to those higher ideas
Okay.
from the bottom up,
Okay,
but I
fine.
think your top-down overview is really good summary.
And are you cool? You're cool with those, I assume?
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay.
And Penn's willingness to move forward with this, I stated it in here, but I'd like to emphasize that as well. I
Yeah,
think
it's
a great
really
point.
it's not a small matter that Penn National would be, it's got this window of 2 or 3 or 4 years, 2.5, 3 years, when they took a big risk and they have an opportunity to recoup their investment, and they are prepared to put that period of time in play here, and that's not a trivial commitment on their part. Okay, did you want to raise your questions, Commissioner?
Yeah, some of the questions, frankly, tie in dovetail precisely with one of your points, at least one of your points. And there are about 4 questions I had about the memo itself. The first has to do with the review of the research conclusion. That's on page 1. The memo says the flaws in the prior research are due to the fact they focused on problem gamblers rather than recreational gamblers who may want to set limits to maintain safe levels of gambling to ensure that they don't move along the spectrum toward problem gambling. I thought we were going to sell this, and I think this is not a trivial matter, and portray it as a budgeting tool rather than a prevent problems tool. And as a budgeting tool, it seems to me to have an appeal that would remove a barrier that might otherwise exist to people signing up, and 2, be of some real utility to people who simply wanted to budget. They didn't think they were going to become problem gamblers. In fact, they weren't worried about that at all. But they had $100 to spend, and this is just a reminder that they had $100 to spend. And it seems to me that on that level, that establishing that brand, if you will, or some other brand, has an impact on how we approach the implementation and content of the tool. So I just wanted to ask if we were on a different wavelength, and if not, should the memorandum be changed in its final form to reflect that?
Yeah, it seems like in the memo, it talks about the focus is on problem gamblers, and really that's the basis of what my point was, is that in the research, it focused on problem gamblers. I think I agree that our focus is not necessarily on the problem gamblers, it's more on the recreational gamblers it's a much, much, much larger percentage of the people who come in, that it is a budgeting tool, but it's a budgeting tool that helps them stay, to maintain those safe levels of gambling.
Yeah, but, okay, I guess that's my point. And maybe it's too minuscule a point to spend any time on. But it seems to me that somebody who wants to maintain safe levels of gambling may be very different from, and a smaller subset of, people who want to just stay on budget. I mean, the way they want to stay on budget for hamburgers, or gasoline, or beer. And this is a tool to help them do that. And I thought that we'd had a discussion before that focused on that. And that's a very different, I think a very different message emanates from that than a message that this is a tool to help you stay safe.
Okay. No, I agree.
I agree with that notion as well. That was also my understanding. And I was going to bring up a concern, a related concern, in one of the recommendations when we start talking about a punitive approach, which if this is all to be about informed decision making and it's a budgeting tool and it's optional, I start to get a little uncomfortable when we come back and say, now there's going to be these repercussions by not sticking to the limit, or now we're going to continue to message, continue to require to say no, however often or at however intervals. So there's a gradient here of there's a theme of intervention that I wonder about. You know, as some of these recommendations start to work together, there's more and less intervention that steers away from the informed decision making that bubbles up exactly to that main point, Commissioner, that you bring up.
And yeah, I'm on the same wavelength with you, and I think that when you establish the objective,
Yeah.
A number of consequences flow, at least indirectly, from the existence of that objective as opposed to another objective. And so I would really like us to, if it is our consensus, wrap our arms around the objective of a budgeting tool, which, in addition to being helpful to people who simply want to maintain a budget, will accomplish the goal that, or help to accomplish the goal of keeping people at a safe level.
I had go ahead.
Would you be comfortable with, I like the term informed decision-making as well as a budgeting tool. Would you be comfortable
Sure.
to incorporate
Absolutely,
that? Because I
absolutely.
think that does
Absolutely.
bring it in a subtle way, if you use the term informed decision-making.
I'm not even wedded to budgeting. If we, what I am concerned about is getting away from
Right,
Right.
problem gambling or keeping you safe.
right, agreed.
I absolutely agree with that, and I think that how this is presented, how we position it is key to the success. If we start putting those types, I think, Chairman, you mentioned it in the last meeting, is that it should have no value statement or non-value stated. It shouldn't be about problem gambling. It shouldn't even necessarily be about responsible gaming with those value-laden types of terms. It should be about giving people the tools to help them make decisions about how much they want to gamble.
I had a slightly different take on our conversation, but I think it gets us to the same place. I thought when we had that conversation, started out with Mr. DeSalvio and then others, you know, that was more a positioning tool than an underlying rationale for why we're doing this. You know, I thought it was like to say, if you position this as a budgeting tool, it is more likely to be successful. So let's be sure we talk about it as a budgeting tool. And then somebody said, yeah, we're not even going to call it a responsible gaming room, we're going to call it the lounge. You know, it was a positioning strategy, a marketing strategy, rather than an underlying, you know, rationale for what we were doing. I think it gets me to the same place. I think the language, you know, the way we position this and all of our underlying documentation should be clear that this is to be positioned as an informed consent tool, as a budgeting tool, not something in the context of saving people from
Well,
propaganda.
which is where my point about the interventions, I don't think it's only about positioning. I think there is, and we could get
Oh, of
right to
course,
it.
I agree with
You know, if there's a quick repercussion, if there's an intervention measure of whatever sort, it's no longer a positioning. It's not longer a messaging only. It has become, you know, an intervention.
Yeah,
Maybe-
and we're going to get to
Yeah,
some
we
of
We're
will.
gonna get to
That- we'll
those. We're gonna
that,
get to
yeah.
those.
We're-
Yep.
Okay. So maybe we could, in the ultimate version of this, we could revise that section. The second question I had was on page 2, and it's the same question you raised, Mr. Chairman. And that is that in the conclusion there at the top, the third sentence, I think, I've seen this demonstrated through the process of developing the RGF as well as applications. While they have shared concerns about using limit-setting tools, they've also expressed a willingness to see what measurable benefit can come from it. And that gets to my point that I don't see anything in here that talks about how we're going to measure and what it is we're going to measure. But I don't think I need to say anything more about that. I think everybody agrees with that, including you, that we need to develop that, we need to work on it, we need to figure out what it is, and we need to have that objective in place before we get this thing rolling.
The research agenda recommendation for moving forward, embedded in that, the second recommendation is assuring that we have evaluation of each of the key features of the responsible gaming framework, and this would be at the very top in my mind. And so I think that they need to move forward in parallel, the development of this if we move forward with it, and the evaluation that would occur in terms of how do we measure that benefit. I think is a complex conversation that I think that we need to have, and it will be forthcoming.
The next one then is down at the bottom of the page where we're talking about strategic sciences. And the conclusion says the report created by Strategic Science, entitled Inform, and the title of it there, provides a compelling case to adopt play management tools in Massachusetts. And the point I raised with you yesterday is that we've never responded, to the best of my knowledge, to the Schaefer-Laducier letter, which says that this is not a compelling case, that the methodology raises a lot of questions, and that it's subjective and it's not objective. And that doesn't torpedo the idea, but it just occurred to me that if we didn't say something about that letter from two very respected researchers in this area, we left ourselves vulnerable to criticism. And if there is no effective answer to that, then should we include it as a basis for our decision to go forward? So that was what I laid on you yesterday. I'd do it again.
The moving forward with a play management system overall, I think, as Mr. Chairman, you said, it fits well within our precautionary approach that we've adopted through the framework. And the precautionary approach says that, well, basically, we say that we will use evidence-based practices where those evidence-based practices are available. In the absence of evidence-based practices, and where we feel that there is still a risk of potential harm, we will adopt a precautionary approach. And the precautionary approach would say if there appears to be potential, if it's a promising practice, we would move forward with that, but we would evaluate it as we've discussed earlier. In terms of the letter that was provided by Dr. Schaefer and Dr. Ladouceur, they point out that the report that was conducted by Strategic Science was not evidence-based. That I believe that they also state that that the report did not look at the scientific evidence behind it. And that, in my mind, was not the purpose of the work that was done by Strategic Science to explore what was going on in other jurisdictions. We had already covered what evidence, what research existed behind this in advance of the work done by Strategic Science. And in fact, that's the entire reason why Strategic Science did the work that they did. It was to say, all right, we have inconclusive evidence in the research, but what's the experience of other jurisdictions in doing this, and what else can we possibly learn? And that's why when the responsible gaming framework was adopted and this was set aside and we said, we don't really know what's going on here. Let's do some more investigation. And that, in large part, hinged on, let's look at what happened in other jurisdictions and see what their experiences were. Their experiences, what they know about it, and what they would recommend to Massachusetts as a new jurisdiction venturing forward into this.
But I guess my question is not, my question is how do we deal with the statement in that letter, and to quote it, as original framers of the responsible gaming concept and many such programs that have emerged from these principles, a suggestion in the Strategic Science report do not meet the evidence-based approach integral to responsible gaming programs adopted by the Massachusetts Commission in the framework.
They put in parentheses the evidence-based approach, and
It was in quotes.
it was in quotes, I'm sorry, and that is true, but we also say we will use an evidence-based approach, but we will also employ a precautionary approach.
Okay, but how do we then say that Strategic Science report provides a compelling case for adoption of this framework?
Could I take a shot at this? We aren't saying that it does. Mark is. Mark believes, apparently, that Strategic Science created a compelling case. I don't. I disagree. I'm not doing this because of the Strategic Science report. I think the Strategic Science report was a weak read. It wasn't supposed to do what Schaefer and Ladissour said it was supposed to do, and they misconstrued the framework structure about data, evidence-based. But I wasn't going to get into, I don't agree with some of the text that precedes the features. So I don't think this is part of the official record that we are adopting. We are not endorsing Mark's memo. What we have all said is under certain conditions, we can go forward with a play management system and let's talk about the features. But this should be on the record that I am not accepting that assertion that Strategic Science made a compelling case, nor apparently are you.
Right.
And I hear somebody else do.
Nor
but
am I.
that doesn't get in the way of us going forward and adopting what we think, for the reasons that we think are compelling.
That's fine, and what I was under a misapprehension then, but because I was assuming that we were going to have a vote ultimately to adopt this memo, and I wanted to make sure that a memo reflected the Commission's consensus, and if we're not going to do that and make it clear that we're not going to do that, then that's fine. And I understand what you're saying and what your view is, and I disagree with it. So on that point.
Yeah, actually, that my takeaway from this strategic science paper was that the recommendation was noted to optional player management systems. But I agree ultimately with the way you characterize this and summarize it. But this was a source of confusion when we had the applicant, the licensees, talking about these, talking about play management systems. We were talking about multiple options. I had in my mind that we were only considering optional,
We were.
opt-ins, etc., as opposed to the review of the other jurisdictions that made this a requirement and failed, the review of other, or not failed, but reverse track like Nova Scotia, and the review of current jurisdictions that are doing this, but there's not a lot of results that they have not yet been able to provide. But as you characterize it well, that was not the conclusion that I took either.
Mark, would you be comfortable making this your recommendation and not theirs to us? So you recommend, after you've reviewed everything, including the report, including comments, presentations, research, our feedback, so your recommendation would be that there is a compelling case for us to try this as a test and not have it read that it's their recommendation? Because now this is your memo.
Right. Yes.
Well, okay,
You can do that, but it's irrelevant
Okay.
because we're not adopting this memo. so-
Yeah.
Right,
I
right.
got it. I got it.
Okay. All right, so I think, so.
I'm done with the,
Okay, well, let's start going through, you've got 15 features here that you're proposing, and we've all said, under the right circumstances, we'd like to do this, so I think we should just go through each of these features. So, Mark, you want to just take this, why don't you go through one by one, read one by one, and we'll talk.
Sure. Number one, play management tools will allow patrons to pre-commit to an amount spent per gaming session or day and/or per month. I'm focusing on the amount spent rather than on time, as was originally discussed. I think that the limit here will allow for a better evaluation of the tool.
I have no issue with the first one.
could, the devices that we looked at, one of the devices, maybe more of them at the G2E,
Right.
did have a time limitation feature that did not have a dollar amount attached to it. And so, what's the rationale for not including that?
Two pieces, actually. One does go back to the evaluation of the tool, and so that we can get a better read on what is the benefit, and we can target it specifically to one specific feature. Another, and this I believe relates back to recommendations from our licensees, is to keep it relatively simple from the onset. They have many reasons, I think, in terms and as it relates to development, to keep it as simple as possible.
Got it?
And it relates to
That
a
makes sense.
budgeting tool as well.
Right,
Yes.
yeah.
Yeah, good
Makes
point,
sense, makes sense.
good point.
Good point. Okay.
Anybody else? I'm okay with
I'm
this,
okay
too.
with that.
And so we're leaving, oh, no, it would have time and month, but the user could choose to use days and/or months, but both options would be available.
Correct.
No, the difference is between money and time.
No, I know, amount of money per session
unit.
or per month.
Yeah.
Right.
It all relates to the amount of money spent, not
Right.
to the amount of time
No,
spent.
if I said
Yeah.
something different, I didn't, yeah.
Okay.
But the user, when they tap into it, will be able to pick whether they want to limit the amount of money they spend that session or for a month or both. That's their choice, right?
Correct. Yes.
Okay, so I think we're all in support of one. Next,
Number two, play management tools are mandatory for licensees to offer in all electronic gaming machines.
Do we want to clarify that during this test period?
Yeah, my
mean-
question was, how does this jive with the test period? Why would it be mandatory if we're getting, if we're agreeing that we're gonna try this, and they've already agreed to try it?
this is all about the test. This is only we're only adopting rules for a test period now.
How
Are we
would
go-
this relate to the development of a regulation? And that's when I recommended this, the key thing is that I wanted it to be that it was required that it was offered on all the gaming machines in the establishment. And as I understood, we were moving forward with a regulation, and as such, that's why I structured the wording of this as I did.
This is another thing we discussed yesterday. It seems to me we have to have a regulation. We have to put this through the regulatory process, so that whatever we do today has to be subject to regulations promulgated during the normal regulatory promulgation process, these principles will apply. Or something. I mean, we can, but these are not going to have any force and effect of their own because they are too regulatory. And it seems to me the regulation can be itself a test period regulation. And it can contain a suicide clause that says that after, it dies after a set time, or after, maybe we could come up with a better phrase.
I was thinking
How about
maybe,
sunset?
Sunset clause.
yeah.
Yeah, that would probably be better. Yeah. A sunset
I mean,
clause.
I would think what we would probably do is have a set of regs which govern the player management test period. That's what this is going to be
Right.
all about.
Right.
Fine.
So on all electronic gaming machines, I guess that makes sense. Is that, are there
Right.
electronic gaming machines that we would not, that this would not apply to?
No.
Is there any difference between, obviously, the one-on-one machine versus the use of this in a machine where there's more than one player on the virtual poker or something like that? I'm at
yeah.
a table with 4 other people, and all of a sudden, I'm the one getting the flash-up messages.
Right.
It's interesting.
Yeah.
Well, this is all going to be, there are going to be nuances here,
Yeah.
I'm sure, that we're going to come up with.
We'll
but-
have comment
Yeah,
period.
there'll be, okay. It doesn't say anywhere here, Mark, but I think it's implicit, but maybe it's not. This will only be available to players who have a play management card, correct?
It does say it here.
Oh, it does say that?
Yeah.
Well, that it's seamlessly integrated, but it doesn't say that it will be available only to those with cards.
Yeah.
I mean, that doesn't limit it, it's just that's the only people for whom it's possible to.
Right.
You can't possibly use it unless you have a player card.
That's how I understand it. I mean, I guess it would be possible that you could have a player card where the only feature on it would be the use
Would be
of
the play
that.
management, right?
Yeah, but perhaps that would be a discussion that we would have with, from the onset with PIN. But I don't see, at this point, I don't see a separate card being,
Right.
as the alternative, would there be a separate sort of card that would be only tied to this? And I don't think that would not be my recommendation. My recommendation is that it's tied to the player reward card.
Right. Okay,
Right.
next.
Okay. Number 3, play management tools are voluntary for players to use.
Everybody okay?
Yeah.
Well, that raised for me, on an opt-in or opt-out basis. That doesn't answer that question. And that was one of the 2 main issues raised by the industry group that spoke. So when I raised this with you yesterday, Mark, you had a response that I'm sure is the same response you have today, but it raises a very important issue that carries through this whole thing. So I turn it over to you.
That, to me, it's voluntary, period. But I think that, as I recall, Commissioner, we were discussing number 9, when signing up for a new player card account with the casino, the patron will be required to decide whether to use the player management tool. They decide yes, they decide no. It's not an opt-in or an opt-out specific. It's not one or the other.
Well,
Maybe I'm wrong there.
No, we raised it, I mean, the discussion bled into that, that's right. But that was the point that I wanted to raise, and that is that
How,
that every player who signs up for a player management card under the framework Mark envisions would be required to say, I want this, or I don't want this, but they would be required to affirmatively check a box one way or the other.
That's correct.
And my question about that was, and maybe it's obviated by by the fact that this may not go into effect as soon as the facility opens. How does that jibe with the mass of, being able to process the mass of people who are anticipated to be signing up for player management cards that first week or two? Maybe that's irrelevant, maybe that's something that they just have to figure out for themselves, but that was an issue that Penn raised.
One of
It's
the
not dispositive, but it's an issue.
One of the significant challenges for this tool is uptake, and
its
is
uptake?
uptake how many people use it. And I hear that, and I think that from the onset we need to remove as many barriers as possible for people to utilize this tool. And that, while it absolutely, it's never been, it hasn't been debated that it's voluntary. It is, but how do we roll this out in order to make sure that people know that it's an available tool for them to use?
And your concern is that if it's simply an opt-in tool, that the operators won't tell people about it.
That's correct.
Well, we can regulate that. I mean, we can manage that. But I was originally thinking this is there's either opt-in, meaning if you don't do anything, you're not in automatically, or there's opt-out, meaning if you don't take yourself out of it, you're in it. And I think none of us like that. You've got another one, which is you have to say something. You don't have the option of not answering the question. And as we're talked through this sign-up period, with the Penn people, they were talking about some number of seconds, I think it was, that they would process in those early days when you've got hundreds and probably thousands of people signing up. And unless you radically alter that whole sign-up period, which is a pretty dramatic change, or you don't launch this at sign-up and you're only marking it after the fact, people wouldn't, there's no way people could make an informed decision about the tool, in that period of time. And you would be having the customer service reps or whoever, probably a lot of temps who are signing up people, trying to force people quickly make a decision. Yes or no? Do you want to do the play management? Do you not? What is play management? Well, it's I think as a practical matter, unless you don't do this en masse, you only do it for the handful of people, that's just not practical. I don't see how you could I don't even think you'd want to. I think you're going to want to try to, this system was only going to work for people who were thoughtful about, call it their budget or their playing habits, whatever turns you on. But, and they're going to want to think about this a little bit and try to figure out, and probably even think about, what do I want to put in as a limit and so forth. So I just don't see that as a practical option. So I think what they were talking about, and we don't have to cross this bridge completely, but what the Penn people were talking about, I think, were saying at the time of this very quick sign-up where you get your player card, you will get something from the customer service rep that, I'm just making this up, but basically it's a really beautifully done little piece that says, here's how you can budget your game today. Maybe, and it's got a voucher for a free sandwich, saying if you sign up for this, control your budget, you get a free sandwich. And now take this away and go think about it, and you can talk to the folks at the Game Sense booth or whoever if you want to. And I've been thinking it's probably going to have to be some kind of system like that. And we can work really hard on trying to maximize the amount of communication or the amount of scrutiny and intensity that each new customer gives to the play management tool. But I don't see how you can make it an automatic. You have to say yes or no before you go forward. I suppose you could say something, maybe you could say within 30 days you have to have said a yes or no, but I'm not even sure. Now we're running around after people, hey, you haven't said yes or no yet,
I'll be doing that.
I just don't see it working.
I too think we can regulate you have to do it. You have to tell people about it, piece. And I also think that if we had an opt-in system and we did regulate that, and then we did, for those who did not opt in, had some kind of a follow-up
Right.
to maybe in the first month's mailing of stuff that we have to send anyway to everybody who signs up, and maybe in the second month, we could accomplish, we could
That's
we
number
could
10.
remove that barrier. I understand your concern about the barrier, and the not making them make a choice is a barrier potentially to its use. I think we could diminish that barrier that way, and we could find a creative way to do it, and acknowledge at the same time the practical sign-up problems that would be created by that.
That last point is embedded, in my opinion, in number 10, but I agree with your conclusion.
Right. So the sense of this group at this point is that item, well, it's a combination of 3 and 9, I guess, right? I guess it's really more number 9.
It's 9.
3 is
Yeah,
9.
three is-
Yeah. 3 is fine, right. So let's not confuse 3. 3 is fine.
3 is fine.
Yeah, so item 9, we're saying that, I think the sense of this group is that we would want this to be a proactive opt-in.
Right.
Rather than a required yes or no.
Right.
Because we can't visualize how
'Cause you
how
can't figure out
practical
how to
that
do
is.
that,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah, there was an additional points about not trying to make all of these very legalistic with, disclaimers and, if we're going to market this effectively, and we do need the help of the operators to do this, in order to remove these kinds of barriers, we don't want to have lots of check in the box, et cetera.
Okay.
Great.
4?
Number 4, the use of play management tools are incentivized at enrollment and periodically thereafter for continued use.
I had a question about this one, Mark, and it was I think when I discussed this with you, we talked about the commission providing an incentive, and it would be a non-gaming amenity, right? It would be food or beverage, not anything to do with gaming. Is that accurate?
That's correct, yes.
So-
I really appreciate our licensees in endeavoring on this, and I think that there is an investment up front, and I think that if the intent of the Public Health Trust Fund would be that if we provide the incentives to help people enroll in this and use this as a budgeting tool, that it has potential to fit well within the Public Health Trust Fund dollars, and I would advocate for that. Obviously, that's not up to me; it would be up to the Public Health Trust Fund Executive Committee. But I think that there are creative ways to provide that pool of funding for incentives.
But those incentives will not include reward points, right?
I would advocate that it is not reward points. I would advocate that, as Commissioner Cameron had said, that we would look at non-gaming amenities. There's another section within the responsible gaming framework that states basically that licensees are providing other forms of entertainment other than gambling to diversify the patron's experience. And this is a way for us to help that along. While they're setting these types of limits, we're also encouraging them to engage in other forms of entertainment while at the establishment.
Right. Now, what about the notion that providing incentives for the use of this tool may prompt some to set unreasonably high limits?
Yeah,
mean,
that's it's certainly something that we need to take into consideration. It was Strategic Science's recommendation that it's directly tied to patrons staying within those pre-established limits. And what I phrased it as is that it's it's incentivized at enrollment and periodically thereafter for continued use.
So what does that mean?
That's, you know, I don't have like a solid idea of that. I think that how this incentive program is set up is something that I would be very interested in working collaboratively with our licensee on. An example of how I could think it worked, obviously at enrollment, if there was, for example, a $10 voucher to use for non-gaming amenities. As Commissioner Stebbins and I discussed yesterday, it could be used as a $10 voucher within the casino establishment. It could also be used in other ways to advance the licensee's commitment to businesses outside of the casino establishment. It really could vary, but I would be very interested in having a discussion with the licensees. In terms of how does it play out in supporting or incentivizing their continued use, I don't think it necessarily has to say you stayed within your preset limits on December 4th, and so therefore you get $10 in non-gaming amenity credit for that. I don't think that I wouldn't support that. I would support that if they stayed enrolled for a period of time and it provided an opportunity to continue to provide responsible gaming information, or I don't know how it would look, but it would be a way to keep people invested in the programs.
So, but you're envisioning then an enrollment, a timing element to the enrollment?
I'm not sure I understand.
Well, you spoke to staying within the program. So if you sign up for the program and you said only just one session, what does it mean staying with the program? If you only said that I wanted to set my limit for today at whatever, and I did, let's just assume that I did. I never hit the limit. How is staying with the program work?
Okay, so that's actually a good point of clarification then. When we say that it's an amount set per session, it would be for that session, but you would stay enrolled. So if you enrolled today and you say you want to set it at $100 for the session, it would apply for your session today. It would apply for your sessions ongoing or days ongoing.
Right. So if I figure out the second session I come, that all I need to do is set a really high limit for myself to get that extra voucher, the second one for signing and one for staying, I could do that, right?
I wouldn't see it that you would be incentivized for every session. For one, if you sign up per session, one session would equal one incentive. I would say it's periodically without a definition of what the time frame is on that.
The same problem arises, though. I mean, I don't know where I come out of this, because if the dollar amount's small, maybe it doesn't make any difference. But the same, say it were marketed that you'll get a $10 coupon upon signing up and a $10 coupon every quarter if you stay in. The same problem, doesn't have the magnitude, perhaps, is there if somebody says, I'd like to get $10 every quarter, so I'll set a $5 million limit.
Well, no, but you wouldn't. I think if you sign up, you get your first voucher, you're in unless you take yourself out of the system. And what that means is every time you put your player card in,
No, not after the month or the day. We just went on
that's-
number one.
No, but that play management tool would allow you to pre-commit to a day, to a session, or to a month. But that's what the tool permits you to do. The tool is there once you've signed up. Once you say, yes, when I stick my card in, up is gonna come my play management tool. Do you want to set a session limit today? Yes, no. And that will come up every time you use your player card unless you unenroll.
I guess I hadn't realized that was going to be the setup.
I-
That-
That's what
That's
I'm-
not how I understood it.
Well, that's the way I think it ought to operate, and you implied something different from that, because you talked about is you stay in it, you might get incentivized.
Oh, I thought-
But I don't think you need to be incentivized to stay in it.
I thought
Actually,
that
once,
be in it.
I had an entirely different view of this thing. I thought that once you signed up for $100 a day, say, that every day you went into the system until you said, I want to get out of this system, you had a new $100 limit. That's just,
it's, yeah, as Commissioner McHugh described it, that's how I envisioned it. And obviously, as detailed as the recommendations are, it wasn't clear.
Mark and Commissioners, particularly with the incentive program and the marketing approach that the licensees might use, as was mentioned, that might be an area to actually require in regulation, but instead of requiring something specific there, refer to the licensee coming back to the commission for approval of a incentive and marketing program. So that would basically take it out of our session at this point and allow it to come back with a fleshed-out proposal. I think that would be more detailed.
Except that we're talking about providing the incentives, not the licensees.
I think, I didn't, apparently we all had different ideas of how this was gonna work. I didn't understand it was what Jim was apparently talking about, what you're talking about. But there still remain, no matter what it is, no matter which way it works, you have two incentive options on the table. One is when you sign up, and one is for something on an ongoing basis. No matter what that is, whether it's, staying within your limit every time you play, or whether it's staying, whatever it is, I think I have a problem with that, with the ongoing incentive.
same here.
I think incentivizing people to try it is good. That's a healthy, legitimate role for the government, if you will, to play. But then to keep, there's two problems with it. I'm not sure I'm comfortable with that it's our job to keep managing this person's relationship like that, number one. And number two, I think it's totally susceptible to gaming. Almost any incentive system you use on a longitudinal basis is subject to being gamed, so to speak.
by gamers.
By a gamer.
I mean, I would certainly be open to somebody coming back with a specific proposal
Yeah.
that says, here's how we could have some kind of an ongoing incentive system. I'm open to that. But at the moment, I'm not with it. The ones that I can understand, I'm not with it philosophically or practically.
Well, I'm in the same boat.
Same here. It was the ongoing that generates the most questions and a little bit of discomfort for me as well. If it's a tool that is going to be perceived as having value in and of itself by some people, the tryout ought to be the one that really informs them about it, that we have it here, may not be available elsewhere, but the ongoing is also the one that raises questions, in my view.
Yeah, I didn't see it as that problematic. I just saw it as, you say 6 months later, you're continuing to use the tool. So, it's like anything else we do in life. You get a coupon, right, because you're a good customer, or you continue to use something, whether that be a gym membership or anything. There's some added value because you are a valued customer of the
But
program.
in the gym membership, you got to go there, or you got to whatever.
Right, that's
all,
what I'm-
all the frequent, and they do that on their frequent user.
Correct.
But
So this is just, you use the tool. I wouldn't be in
if you-
favor.
But the use the tool is, as Jim was saying, encourages you to put in $1,000 and get your coupon every quarter.
I don't think so. I would not spend any more or put a false limit into something just to get a coupon. I don't think most people would do that. I
Okay.
think there's a chance someone could do that, but for the most part, I think, geez, I'm
So
using the
if-
tool, they recognize I'm using it, and they sent me something.
And that's part of my part of my point is that if there's value in the tool, then there's no gaming. If there's intrinsic value in the tool,
There is. I
then why
agree,
do we need
still,
incentives
because
in the first place, right?
They're just letting you know, they recognize you as you're using something, and I didn't see it as every month, so I better scam the system. Do you know?
You just have a good view of human nature. You see it time and time again.
Good thing you weren't a cop,
Yeah, I draw a question between, you know, I certainly don't see anything wrong with incentivizing somebody to get into the plan at the opening step. I think I agree with my colleagues in terms of the ongoing relationship, but if you're overlaying this program seamlessly in their reward card, correct me, maybe I'm being too novice about this, but the benefits can accrue similar to the way a normal reward card would allow them to access benefits if they weren't playing under the play management system. Do I have that right?
Yeah, I think so, yeah.
Well, so long as the incentives were not rewards programs. Remember, we're not suggesting that the incentives for signing up or
right,
staying with the program will accrue reward points. You're not suggesting that?
But you're talking about overlaying this program as part of their rewards. There's a seamless overlay with the rewards card, correct?
That's correct. It would be seamlessly integrated with the rewards card. The rewards for the incentives that we would be talking about for use of this tool would be different than the rewards that they would receive for other types of gaming activities or other incentives that would be connected with the casino.
Well, I was gonna get to this point, but why do we need the seamless integration on the rewards player card data? Purely for identification purposes?
I think that's all by saying seamless integration, people think you're saying more than you're saying, I think. All you mean is it's part of your player card. The technology is into your player card. So when you stick your player card in the machine, it knows it's you, and it knows you've said, yes, you want to have the player management tools, and it gives you the player management tools. That's the end of the seamless integration.
Okay.
That's how I intended it, yes.
You don't get a red card versus a green card, it's all on the same card.
Right.
That's right.
Yeah. The way to track it.
So let me suggest something, just in the interest of time.
Okay.
Three of us, I think, are pretty clearly uncomfortable with the ongoing benefits. Commissioner Cameron is not uncomfortable. It sounds like Commissioner Stebbins is metza, but I think for the moment, the downstream incentives is off the table. But if you've got a specific idea, this is clearly going to be one of the ones where devil's in the details. We'll listen to it. But as a general principle, we were resistant to that incentives.
Okay. Moving on?
Yep.
Okay, number 5, play management tools provide pop-up reminders on the screen of the electronic gaming machine at 60, 90, and 100% of the limit.
I'm okay with that.
Yeah.
Why wouldn't any of these be optional? How do you come with 3 times 60, 90?
This was the method that was used in New Zealand.
So why did you want to use it?
Just looking for precedent, basically.
Doesn't one of the systems that we looked at at G2E have this?
Yeah,
I
that
think
would be
I
the
think
Bally system.
The Bally system, which is going to be used anyway.
Yeah.
I think it makes sense.
So is the question why these intervals, or is the question about the use of pop-up reminders, period?
Why these intervals? And how? Why wouldn't these be optional? For example, do you want a reminder does it start to get into the complexity? You know,
I think I think it does start to get into the complexity.
that we want to avoid. Sort of.
Correct. I think that this would, if you give the people the options for how they would like to be reminded, it adds a whole nother layer, another screen of questions that they would need to answer.
Why do you need 3 reminders as opposed to 1? Let's say.
There's no strict methodology to this.
My reaction would be to this. This is what we'd like to have the test tell us. You know, what kind of notification is the most constructive? I mean, this is completely arbitrary. You know,
Correct.
maybe it's
Yes.
50, 75, and 90. Maybe it's none. Maybe it's 1. You know, and if we need a presumption because the Bally system has this already, we could make this the presumption. But if we really have a test going here, we would be trying to figure out what kinds of use of this tool does have the most constructive impact.
I bet it's based on something.
I think that's a fantastic point, is that this is part of this piece right here is part of what we're evaluating and what construct would be the most beneficial.
Right. So if for some reason or other, you or Bally or Penn wants to start with this, I guess we're saying we're fine with it, but it seems like it ought to be part of the test if need be, if possible. Number 6, we just dealt with.
Okay.
So just to restate that, seamlessly integrated means it's in your card. If you've signed up, certain things happen when you stick your card in the machine. It offers you the play management tools. End of seamless integration.
Right.
Okay, number 7, licensees work closely with the commission to develop marketing strategies to maximize uptake and use of play management tools.
I think this is the one that I'm in the most agreement with,
Yeah,
and
this
should
is
be
really-
number 1, and hence the whole notion of the test. But I really look forward to an ongoing, feedback loop as to how to be creative and strategic about usage of this.
Yeah,
Right.
agreed.
Okay.
Agreed.
Number 8, we have started to discuss. Patrons can enroll to change their limits, to enroll or change their limits from multiple locations, including all electronic gaming machines, customer service stations, on-site responsible gaming information centers, self-service kiosks, and player reward portal of the company website.
I was not comfortable with A, because, I mean, you go down further where you talk about your ability to just kind of disregard what the machine is telling you, but, the message reverberated from me from watching the testimony from the last meeting that, kind of the personal contact was a good thing. So out of those 5, I guess I have a concern about the ability to do it from the gaming machine itself.
So by the gaming machine, how would that work? How would that work?
Well, Commissioner McHugh and I had seen that displayed at the G2E conference. Bally has an example of a system where you would sit down, insert your player reward card. It would ask you if you would like to set, well, in that case, it was set limits on time or amount spent, and from there, it
Whether you
walks you
signed
through a
up or
process.
not?
Correct.
Whether you signed up or not?
Well, no, if you weren't signed up,
If you weren't signed up?
it would ask you.
Do you want
If
to
it did, if you were signed up, it would pull up your
Right, okay.
your account.
And then it just goes through a series of yes or no or check the box questions to get your limits set in. Do you want to do this, yes or no? Hit button A, hit button B. If you answer no, thing goes away.
Well, doesn't that go back to the original enrollment? That is forcing you to say yes or no.
No, it doesn't, because, oh, yes, it does. It does, but it's not a practical impediment to anything.
Right.
Right? And in fact, if you don't require the yes or no answer at the beginning, and the person doesn't sign up, and you send the person some information about it in the first monthly billing and maybe the second monthly billing and the like, then the person has information that she can use when they sit down at the gaming machine to answer those questions, and then there's no time pressures. So
Right.
it doesn't have that practical
Right.
disadvantage. Now, it still may not be a good idea, because the Penn folks said it's better to have some human interaction, so that people can help you make a thoughtful decision, but
Well, once you say no, it doesn't come up on the machine every time,
no,
though.
It does later
You-
on.
no.
No.
Oh, if you tell the machine, okay, so you've been a player card member, you haven't signed up yet.
Right.
You get some stuff in the mail a couple of times.
Right.
You put your card in,
And somehow you can invoke it.
Well, no.
but if you put your card in the first time and it comes up and you say, no, thank you, does it come up every time you put your card in?
According to 10, yes.
No, well, no, we're now talking about the system that we saw in
Yeah.
California. my understanding was that it did not.
It did not, no. I think
you-
that there was
Yeah.
a button that you could touch on the
Right.
screen that would pull it up, and
Right.
you could activate it from that point.
Right.
So once you say no, you're not going to be, it's not going to continue to come up.
No,
Then I have
but
a
if
question
we-
about 10.
I know, I
Yeah,
do too.
we
Good,
could-
good,
I have some ideas about number two.
Okay.
Well, does this make you feel any better?
Well, and maybe it's dividing the two. It's the difference between the enrollment via the machine and the changing the limits via the machine.
Well, he's talking about enrollment.
Right.
They're talking about enrolling.
Right, but if you read number A, it says can enroll or change their limits. I think changing their limits, I'd like to see somebody not do it from the machine.
Well, this gets to where are the barriers for people to enroll and participate in this program? I want to remove as many, I want to be, I guess it's the tension between making sure that it's not overly burdensome for when you're signing up and that it takes too much time, but at the
Right.
same time, we want to make sure that as many barriers to enrollment or to involvement, participation with this are as small as possible.
Yeah, I agree. Young people like to do everything online. They don't want to go to a kiosk anyway.
And I understand that, but you also allow, if we accept the other conditions further down below, that you can play past your limits. So
Correct.
these two seem to be butting heads against each other, was in my opinion.
Well, why don't we make it 8A and B? So for starters, let's say patrons can enroll at all 5 places. And it sounds like we're all saying fine.
Yeah. I don't have any problem with
Eight.
changing your limit either.
Well, I understand, but some do. So 8B is you can change your limit from the following 5 locations.
I
A,
see
we're
your
okay with. B, at least Commissioner Stebbins has a problem.
No, it was the other way around.
A is enroll. Everybody, we all like enrolling in
Yeah,
all 5
I'm
places.
comfortable now.
Oh, I thought part of the point about the customer service experience and those difficult or whatever conversations was that human interaction upon enrollment.
Well, that was
That's
one
what
person's
Penn was
opinion.
That's
advocating.
what Penn
Right.
says, right?
Right.
And
They wanted to have that conversation at enrollment.
They want somebody else to have that conversation at enrollment. Right.
Yeah,
I mean, they want to give you a chance to go over to this, talk to somebody else.
At the
talk about
lounge,
it,
right.
At the lounge, right.
It's going to be clearly part of the evaluation process of where do people, if we can have different options of where do people enroll and what seems to be the most common way. But
Yeah.
So who's okay with the 5 places for enrolling?
I'm okay.
I am.
I am.
Okay with that.
And I think that's a good point. I'd like to find out about this.
Right.
And I'd like to, yeah, and I'd also like to find out about the limit changing piece.
Mm-hmm.
And then at the end of the test, we'd make the permanent decision, or if we
Yeah.
go forward.
So on 8B, which is changing limits, I guess we're all okay with changing limits at B through E. There's some question about A. I'm fine with changing limits on site.
I am
at the
too.
machine.
I am too.
It's a tool.
Yeah.
I'm fine with it as a test, because I
Well,
really
this is all
do.
a test, right?
No, I know that. But I would like to include all 5 in the test.
Yeah.
Just to see who does what where. Right?
So
You know, I'm
That's
also,
Cap's
I'm also,
It is, it does.
I'm also getting, I'm also a little, I'm thinking about if it's everywhere, if you have to say no to continue, everywhere, very often, or every time you start playing, you start doing nothing, you always click no. I'm concerned about that possibility. This all goes back to, the test, in a way. But if the frequency of the messages, wherever and however, they are delivered, start to be such that, in order to continue playing, you have to keep hitting no. I'm worried that it becomes unconscious, and you just
number are you
you just keep
talking
doing.
about?
No,
Not
I'm talking about how some of these interact with each other, not just one number, but a couple.
Which couple?
Well, we're talking about periodic checking with patrons on number 10, and I know we're going to get to that.
Yeah.
talking about 13.
If we're talking about every time you start a session,
We're not,
I thought we were.
no?
No, the Valley system, as best we understand it, if you haven't said yes or no, if you haven't already said yes or no, first time you put in your card, it will offer you the chance, do you want to use play management? If you say no, you're done, it doesn't come up anymore, unless we decide that we want it to come up after a certain amount of time.
Because it's currently
But at the
constructed
moment, it's off.
as we understand it. If you say no, it's done, it doesn't come
All
back.
right. I'll come back to that on number 10.
Right.
Yeah, no, I'm with you in spirit. I mean, I agree with the principle.
Well, I have a practical example on this, actually. My household is a big user of the Wii system that has, a message just like that. After you've been playing for a couple of hours, it tells you, do you want to go outside? You've been playing for 2 hours. And guess what everybody does? No. After a while, that becomes unconscious. The message becomes futile. I've seen it. I've seen it
Your
happen.
kids don't go outside at all.
They do not. Well, not while they're playing the Wii, it's almost funny, but I've seen it in action. You read it the first time, and you never anymore. It just becomes another reason to click now.
So where would you come
No,
down
no,
on 10? On 10? What would you recommend we do on 10?
I was going to suggest we strike it.
That it never be reoffered?
But you just said no.
No, it's not reoffered unless we say we want it reoffered.
Right.
At the moment, we've suggested a system that if you say no, it's forever. But now we have the opportunity of thinking, should we reoffer it from time to time?
Okay.
And what do you think about that?
Well, it depends on the time.
Okay? What do you think about what time?
I don't know. I think the time should not be one that is very often. It all goes back to, well, it depends who we're talking about, right? If you're a player that comes once a year and you offer it every year, then you're offering it every time. If you're a player that comes once a week, then you ought to think about offering it 2 or 3 times a year by some measure. And that's the difficulty in all of this,
So you
that
could
it
do
all
by
depends on the
times.
player.
You could do it by times then. So say on your 8th time, you got it one more, it comes up again. So you said no, and then you came 7 more times.
Well,
then
and
the
then
8th time, that could be 8 years.
Well, I know, but then the problem becomes on all, time is only one variable for some people. Money is the one that actually, matters most, and we just sort of talked about.
Well, one thing we talked about when we were talking about the initial crush to make the yes or no decision was for people who did not make, and we changed that to an opt-out. For people who did not, an opt-in system. For people who did not opt in, then in the first 1, 2, 3 monthly billings, or monthly statements that they got, there would be information about this system. That's another way to give a periodic check to see if people want to use it.
And I agree with that. The periodic check can happen in numerous ways. It can be based on how long the patron has been enrolled in the player card system and hasn't enrolled in this. It could be a periodic, just a push out of information to all players who haven't enrolled in it. I think that there's a variety of ways, and it's intentionally vague how that would happen.
How about this? If we say to answer to number 9, we would like the system to be remarketed, the option to be reoffered from time to time through some mechanisms to be determined. Not very many, not very frequent. But this is another one of the things that the test should be about. What works?
Yeah.
Does it help if you offer it every 6 months, or does it bother people if you offer it every 3 months? So we like the idea of reoffering it on some not very frequent basis through some medium or other yet to be determined.
I think that's a perfect solution.
Yeah.
Okay? 11.
All right. Limit setting tools are coordinated with other tools of the play management system, such as cost of play messaging. Monthly statements of gaming activity is required in 23K Section 29. Brief problem gambling self-assessment tool, tips on responsible gaming, educational quizzes, and information on how to access assistance.
So I had a question about C, and as I suggested yesterday, in the responsible gaming framework, this problem gambling self-assessment tool was only mentioned in connection with signing up for credit, section 5.2. And so I wondered whether we were changing the responsible gaming framework to include it here, or why it was here, particularly if this is not being marketed as a problem gambling prevention device and instead is a budgeting device.
Under Strategy 2, the 2.2, Play Information and Management Systems, it doesn't state it explicitly, whereas the other ones are. But to me, I feel like that assessment tool would fit well under Play Information tools. And I could read that section to you if you'd like.
2.2?
Correct.
Yeah, why don't you? Commissioner McHugh has it in front of him, but we don't.
Okay. Let me see, I'll try to keep it as brief as possible. So play information tools provide patrons with access to cost of play messaging, monthly statements including the patron's total bets, wins, and losses, tips on keeping play manageable, educational quizzes, and information on how to access assistance.
So what was the answer to Commissioner McHugh's question about when this is only used in our framework so far when you apply for credit? Is that correct? So how does it relate? What does it mean by including it here?
Well, to me, we're talking about under 2.2, this overarching umbrella of play information and management systems, that brief problem gambling assessment tool would fit under the play. It would be a type of play information tool, and that would then be limit setting tools would be coordinate. Limit setting tools would fit also underneath that larger umbrella of play information and management system as a part of a play information and management system.
So this isn't really adding anything. This is stating something, restating something that's already in our framework.
I think Commissioner McHugh's point is that I don't specifically the framework doesn't specifically mention the brief problem gambling assessment tool in that section 2.2, and I'm introducing it here. And my rationale for that is that it's not mentioned specifically here, but I feel that it fits well as part of the play management system.
My question was, what does coordinated mean here? And let's use it specifically to C.
Yeah.
So practically, what does it mean? When do I have to answer yes or no to the 9 or 4 or 3 questions in the assessment tool?
I think
Assuming I have no credit.
Okay, so yeah, assuming you have no credit. So for example, you go to a self-service kiosk and you insert your card because you want to either enroll or change limits. However we would land on that. Also, when that pulls up, there would be an option to find information on tips on responsible gaming. There would be an educational type of quiz, and there would be an assessment, a problem gambling assessment, if you choose to want to take that. It's all about taking your personal behavior and trying to provide you with as much information as you can about your gambling behavior and how it may or may not be at risk.
Well, from your description of it then, it's not a it's not a gate through which you have to go in order to do anything.
No.
It's simply offered as an array of things. Would you like to know how much you spent this month? Would you like to know have information on how the machine works? Would you like to have information on the odds? Would you like to take a self-assessment test? If it's that kind of an array, and it's limited to that, I don't have a problem.
It is,
but I
it's
thought
all
that-
voluntary, and I think, perhaps I'm just not clear, it wasn't clear.
No, no.
It wasn't clear there, but I do see it as a voluntary piece, as the others are.
Yeah, so you'd have to click on it to use it, otherwise you don't have to.
Right, and much like the monthly statements that are explicit in section 29, that would be, those are voluntary as well.
Would this be at every machine?
You know, I wouldn't even, I don't even necessarily see if it would be on a machine. I would see that it would be something that you could access from a kiosk or
The responsible
or the
gaming
Responsible
framework?
Gaming Information Center.
Yes.
Or in your monthly mailing.
Correct. If they choose, if they choose to do that.
Then
Yeah,
I'm
so
okay. I'm okay with that.
Caveat, I don't have any problem.
Me too.
Okay, so I think we're comfortable with that one.
Great.
Next.
Number 12, play management tools are flexibly designed to allow changes to limits. Decreases take effect immediately. Increases will be subject to a 24-hour cooling off period.
I don't understand that one. You can't change your limit during a session? Like if you say at the beginning, I'm going to spend $100, and you get your 60%, this is what, 90, and then you hit 100%. You're saying you can't play anymore at all?
No, you can continue playing, but if you want to provide increases or decreases to that, the limit that it's,
So it cuts you off.
no, it does not cut you off.
It-
No.
So you just can't change, you can continue to play as long as you want, spend as much as you want, but you just can't change the limit?
So that's unless you want to decrease it. So the idea is that you set these limits at a point where before you sit down in that a rational state of mind, and you say, I have $200, this is how much I want to spend, and as a budgeting tool, that you and so that if you want to, if you begin gambling, you realize, I really don't want to spend that much, you should be able to change that, and it would take effect immediately. If you sit down and you're gambling, and you reach that limit, or you approach that limit, and you say, no, I really want to spend $500, that would then be subject to a 24-hour cooling off period.
But how
But
does
you
that,
still could spend the $500.
But you can still
But they
spend
could
it.
still spend the
So
$500.
how-
Then you got to get to 13. This ties to 13.
That's,
Because the next phase is, after B is, you can keep playing, however.
Well, yeah, and I have a lot of problems
I
with
do
that.
too.
same here.
yeah, I don't
Just the
understand it
preview.
if you don't, because if you can spend the money anyway, what does it matter if you change the limit or not?
Well, one point he's saying is you don't get any loyalty points.
Right.
So,
Right.
and you can always go to another machine, I mean, you can, if you, and play with cash, you can't
Well-
stop people from playing.
And
This isn't even gonna, you don't have to go to another machine. You can stay right at that machine and gamble as much as you want.
Right.
Which made me,
So-
goes back to my original point of why are you allowing someone to change limits?
Why allow them to change
Why are
limits?
you allowing someone to change limits at the machine anyways, if you can just keep playing?
Well, I think it comes down to a philosophy question here, we are all comfortable with offering people the opportunity to put a limit on.
Yes.
They choose, they make a limit, then they get to the limit, and they want to change their mind. None of us has any way of knowing why they want to change their mind. And, that's where we got to go. So do we think it's right to continue to take an active role in facilitating their limiting their gambling? Is that our job? Is that the right thing to do? And you could, any of a number of things can happen. We could say you can't increase. We could say, yeah, you can keep playing. but you're going to lose your player rewards points. You could say a bell goes off and the cops come. I mean, there's anything we could do. But I think it's, you know, what do we feel, do we want to continue to exercise our judgment over their ability to continue to play?
My feeling is no. If we want this tool to be used more than once, or more than, if we want this tool to be used more often, blowing a limit may have the result of not coming back to use it, given some of the recommendation here to have some consequences, especially in my view.
Lowering the limit may have that?
No. If somebody sets a limit and goes past the limit, and there's a number of consequences, repeated messages, losing points, et cetera, the likelihood of coming back and using that
I got that.
tool has plummeted, in my opinion.
Right.
You've only used it however many times, got you to that point, and after that, you're going to say, you know what, I'm just going to do it. I'm speculating again, but that's just how it feels. And it goes back, ultimately, it rolls up to a philosophy issue, and what's the role of the regulatory body and the decision maker, who's ultimately having a lot of consequences, I might add, right, by themselves. If you're losing money, that's a punitive enough consequence, in my view.
So
in my opinion.
I suppose the real dichotomy, I mean, the overarching thing is this purely an information system, or is it a
Interventionist.
intervention system?
If I can go back to what is the basis of an informed player choice. And it includes such things as facts about how gaming works and the probability of winning, passive types of information or informational types of information, but it also includes information about the player's own behavior and thus allowing them to understand their playing behavior in real time. And so I think that, to me, that seems like a good sort of guiding principle to follow when we think about where do we need to land on any of these specific details.
But the 24-hour thing,
Yeah.
if I understand the conversation, is an intervention step as opposed to a pure information step.
So if the idea is that you use pre-commitment and you set up those those limits
Right.
in advance when you're in a rational state of mind, and that those are the limits that you set, and that's how you set your budget. So then you're not changing them when you're during the gaming session.
And that's an intervention.
Yes.
An intervention premised on the notion that if you are changing your limits, you are probably not exercising free will. Changing limits upward, you're probably not exercising free will. So you need to be helped. I'm not, I mean, just trying to get at the basis for this, not.
I don't know if I agree with the term free will, but
But you're in an altered state of some
but you're not necessarily in that same rational state of mind that you were when you sat down and you determined these limits.
Right. So that's
It's
the philosophical, I mean, that's the philosophical question.
I was trying to think about other kinds of human endeavor. You know, drinking is very analogous. You know, for most people, drinking is harmless. For some people, it's a problem. For some people, it can become a problem. Very similar. And you can sue a bartender. If a bartender keeps serving somebody who's visibly intoxicated, the bartender can be held liable. You know, so we do have a government tool by which we try to intercede and, if you will, protect people in the drinking analog. Is this that? I don't think so. You know, it's the industry may have to wrestle with that issue at some point.
Has been.
But this is a step before that. This is, you know, like if a guy bumps into a bar and he says to the bartender, "I think I'm only having 2 tonight," and then he asks for a third, he can't get it, or
Well,
Gets in
and
2-ounce cups?
he gets it in 2 ounce cups, or he gets it with
Well,
no ice, you know.
you know, with a very different, with a very important difference, which is ultimately drinking has a physiological. There's a physiology to drinking, to the mass body of the average mass body of a male and a female, and you know, sure, some people can drink more than others, but ultimately, you know, if you take it long enough, there's an impairment that occurs. The budget that somebody may have is very different, having nothing to do with their physiology, and I think that's a real difference.
We did not adopt the Missouri model where we said it's a $500 loss limit, and once you reach that, you're cut off. That was never even put on the table, and that's analogous to what you're
Well,
talking.
I'm just drawing the distinction between drinking. I know that's not the
But so
analogy
what is-
that you're
so-
making.
Well, so, but what is the implication for this, of what you're saying, for this discussion?
I'm saying it's a lot harder to determine whether somebody has, you know, gone, has reached a limit or approaching a limit or
But does that mean we should intervene or not?
well, the analogy was in the case of bartenders they should, but there's a lot more. It's a lot easier to detect,
Yes.
yeah,
yeah.
somebody who's impaired.
You know, if
Yeah,
if we were having this conversation because we don't know, right?
Yep.
And if we took out these things, took out these interventionist steps, and then created a test that looked at, A, what percentage of the people signed up and what caused them to sign up, and then took a look at people who went past the limits on some useful number of occasions, some scientifically useful number of occasions, and then tracked them to find out, A, why they were going by the limits and what the consequences of going by the limits were. Then we could better assess the need for an intervention piece and the circumstances under which an intervention piece should be inserted. And if we wanted to have a true test of how this all worked, wouldn't it be better to start with a plain vanilla non-intervention thing and then track scientifically what happens to the players who use it?
I would agree with that.
I guess it depends on what we think of as an intervention, because you want the tool to be able to be useful too. So if there's no way of knowing you went over your limit, then how is
Oh,
that
no, no, no.
useful?
You get a sign that says.
Okay, that's
There will
right.
be
So
inter-
some of
yeah,
these steps
there
you
will
like.
be intervention. I think Commissioner McHugh meant the more extreme interventions. There
Okay.
will be interventions.
Right.
You will get a thing that says you've hit your limit.
Right, so see, I would be comfortable with A and B
Right.
under number 13, but not,
Right.
not C, not the punitive, the penalizing, you know?
What about the cooling off period
What
on
about the cooling off period?
12B?
Well, I don't even understand it. I still don't, because you can continue to gamble. So why does anyone care if they change their limit, because no one's stopping you from
Well,
continuing?
because you're going to get messages, if you couldn't raise your limit,
Yeah?
then, if you could raise your limit, you wouldn't get notifications every 15 minutes.
Well, and I don't even know if I like the every 15 minute. I like the one where I hit it.
Okay, I thought you
It's
said
telling me
15.
I'm okay. Listen, you hit your limit, okay? It's telling me that. So that's, how else would the tool work unless it told me
Right.
I hit my limit? And then I might be okay with, I have to actively say, okay, I know I hit my limit and I want to continue to gamble. But then I don't think I like every 15 minutes, and I know I don't like, you forfeit loyalty points. So I would be, the first two, yes, I hit my limit, I know it, and I want to continue. Other than that, that's letting me know I'm using the tool, and I've made a conscious choice to continue. So that's why I don't understand the cooling off, because all I have to do is say I want to continue.
Well, if you eliminate the repeated messages and the
me, I would.
then 13B
would.
is inconsequential.
Yes, every 15 minutes is treating me like a child.
Mhm. I agree.
So, the decrease takes effect immediately, obviously. You hit your limit, you get a notice.
Yes.
you're asked, do you want to set a new limit,
Or do you want to continue? Do you want to
or do you want to
continue?
continue to play?
Right. So if I say yes, then I don't need any cooling off period because I've just acknowledged that I'd like to continue even though I realize I hit my limit. But I'm using the tool. I mean, I made a conscious decision.
Given, adding in what Commissioner McHugh says, which is, you know, once we get started, you know, there may be ways to figure out whether other tools would be constructive or other steps
I
would
would
be
agree with that,
constructive.
yes.
And we'll get feedback, you know, we'll be able to track player behavior, we'll be having some patron interviews, you know, there'll be a lot of data telling us what people think about this and how it's worked. So the idea of starting with the plain vanilla, realizing that we may move the levels of intervention up if we have reason to think it's constructive, then I agree with Commissioner Cameron.
So can we take the second part of B, or actually B, 13B and C altogether?
We were at 12B. What do we do with 12B? That's what started
It
this
looks like we,
conversation.
Yeah.
it looks like we kill it.
We kill it.
Okay.
Right.
And just so I'm clear, 12A is something I can do before I've hit my limit.
Of course.
You can do it anytime.
You can decrease your limit anytime.
Immediately.
So you can decrease your limit anytime, you can increase your limit anytime without the,
Well, I don't,
so
I don't,
basically you take out A and B?
well, I don't
No, no.
disagree with B if the only reason is that you change your limit is you don't want to be told that you hit your limit, then what good is the tool? Do you know, the whole idea of the tool is I said I wanted to spend 200, and it's going to tell me that I have reached that limit, and then I have a button that says, do you want to continue or not? And that would be my choice. So if the reason for B is that you get those two messages, you know, if we get rid of B, then you don't get those messages, then I guess,
No, you-
is,
Unless you wanted to set up a new limit.
when you get those messages, but you have to, if you want to go from 200 to 400, so you don't get the message until you've hit
Yeah.
400, you can continue playing today, but you're going to get the message at 200, and tomorrow you'll get the message at 400.
okay,
Or, you know, what Mr. DeSalvio suggested, you know, if you know your limit's coming up at 200, you get your 90% marker. At that point, you could step in and say, make it 400. You know, it's kind of incenting you to avoid, you know, to keep jumping in, put in a higher limit so you don't get the cutoff point.
but it's not a real cutoff, it's just a notice.
Right.
Do you know?
Yeah.
Right.
So go back, somebody restate what's on the table.
Well, the thing is that these all work together, and if we were eliminating, and it sounds like we are, 13B and C, your point, Commissioner, and I agree with that, 12B is of no consequence. In my opinion, I have the most reservations about 13B and C.
Well, I do too, but I don't think 12B is of no consequence, because you're going to get, the notice has some minimalist intervention
It does.
effect. It tells you, you set a limit, you've hit the limit, and you are choosing to go by the limit you set. That has an impact on the individual. And that's what's going to happen. Now, because people,
Jim, excuse me, that's not B. That would happen even if it just tells you when you hit your
no,
limit.
I'm leading up to that.
Okay, all right.
Right? But the fact that people are given that message, you are not maintaining what you said you were going to do. You've broken your word or something. That has some impact, and therefore, to be able to postpone that ad lib and always keep pushing that out there so that you never get the thing to tell you you haven't kept your word, because you keep changing your word on the fly, is a matter of consequence. And so it seems to me that 12B does have an independent effect, even if 13A is the only consequence of the only other consequence of reaching the limit. Now, whether we should care about that is a different question, but it does seem to me it has an impact.
But, Commissioner?
I just want to kind of quickly, as we're thinking about this, separate 12A and B out. I think we focused a little bit too much of it as you're already at the gaming device. And I think for me, there's been some confusion of some of the practicality of these things of I'm sitting at the machine versus 12A and B, which might not involve me sitting at the machine at all.
Doing it from a kiosk or doing it from home, from
Right.
the, you know.
I do, I'm on my way out, I decide on my way to the garage, I stop in, I say, I want to lower my mount. Boom, done immediately. I want to increase it as I'm at the kiosk or I'm at home because I can access this or the web-based site. So 12A and B seem a little bit confusing to me because understanding the context of, I'm either at the gaming device or I'm not at the gaming device.
Yeah.
13 all seem to me to be things that are pinging me when I'm at the gaming device itself. Am I clear? Is that
Yeah,
right? Is that your
that's a great
understanding?
point. So, but you may be at the gaming device
I may be at the
on
gaming
12.
device.
So
I
what if,
don't know
if
we
you
need
took
to-
out that as, what if increases were, could take effect immediately if you were not sitting at the gaming device?
Right.
Is that what
I'm
you're thinking?
just making sure we're focusing,
Sure.
the context
Yeah.
of 12 is fuzzy because it doesn't talk about where the patron is.
But you
Where
s-
13 is clearly, in my mind, a result of the person still being at the device.
So what if, I mean, the point of 12B is the cooling off and taking a step back and taking a break. And so what if we took out the 24-hour cooling off period, but said that you were not able to make the change from the machine, that you had to go to one of the other places which you could change the limits other than the gaming machine?
Which makes you
and
get
that-
up from the machine.
Right, and that, in essence, provides that sort of cooling off. Same reason why we wouldn't want to have an ATM machine on the gaming floor.
So-
That's going to get back to the question I had earlier about 8A, being able to change limits and things from the device itself.
Well, what,
Wait, can we just finish on this? This was an interesting idea that Mark just came up with. I want to make sure. So you're suggesting that you hit your limit, you get the notice, and if you can keep playing if you want to, but in order to do that, you have to go to some other location?
No, no. If
He's
you wanted
saying
to get
yes,
a new
you're saying
limit,
no.
That's not how I understood it. I understood
you
it.
can always keep playing.
Okay, so,
Well, if you want to increase your limit, number 12, play management tools are flexibly designed to allow changes to the limits. A would stay as is. B would say increases, increases would take effect immediately, but the patron would have to go to wherever.
but, I
Some
think
limits
other
are
than the
not a-
gaming machine.
it's-
limits are of no consequence.
No, limits are not
wait,
a
hang on.
hard stop.
They're not.
So,
It's not a hard stop, but it's
So I really think, I need to play out this example.
okay.
I set a limit for $100, and I reach my limit. I want to keep playing. What happens? I say you've hit your limit. Anything that I continue to do, any more play that I continue to do, do I get a repeated messages? You've hit your limit because now you are, you hit it a little while ago, and are you continuing to get it? Or is this the notion that we're going to come up with a new limit? So you have to set up a new limit in order to keep playing. Because if we all assume and agree that you can keep playing, then what happens when you're in the phase where you've exceeded your limit is of no consequence. I mean, you're telling me that what I already knew 3 times ago, right? If I'm at 150, I already know that my limit of 100 has been exceeded, and every time I keep playing, the $100 limit has been exceeded and continues to be exceeded.
What if we went back, I'm sorry, what if we went back to the idea that we really wanted to study this, so that to make it simple, your limit is, under no circumstances, is your limit a hard stop. It's a notification device, right? Under this frame. So you set a limit, you can change it anytime you want, up or down. You get a notice when you reach the limit, and on you go as we start. And then we figure out who's exceeding the limit, who is changing their limit, why they're exceeding the limit, why they're changing the limit,
Yes.
and what the consequences of changing the limit are, and as part of the study, and then we decide whether we need a cooling off period to increase the limit, whether we need repeated interventions once you hit the limit, whether we need to have counseling if you go 6 times the limit, and a whole variety of other things. But we start off with what I said is a plain vanilla kind of approach to this, and then do a rigorous study that documents scientifically what we're finding and what we need to do to intervene.
I would agree with that.
What would be wrong with that approach? It would start, from your standpoint, at too low a threshold. But
I
but
think
I get that.
I would like to have something in there, and whether it's the pop-up reminder every however many minutes, because as I understand, as you're saying that you would reach your limit, you'd receive a notification that you've reached your limit, and then off you go. There's no consequences from there. And
Well, you'd not acknowledge that I want to keep playing. So you'd have to acknowledge that.
Okay, but nothing beyond that.
For starters, until we tested to figure out what the consequences of that were.
I honestly feel like that's too low, that there needs to be something in there to test out. And it goes back to, it's informed player choice. It's information about the player's own behavior, thus allowing them to understand their playing behavior in real time. I focus on the information, and I really take the piece about, it's not about consequences. This is a tool for people to use. But how do we continue to provide people with information so that they can make that informed player choice to stop or to continue gambling? It's ultimately up to them, absolutely. But how do we provide them with the information and not just stop it at the point which they reach that predetermined limit?
So you think every 15 minutes, is that what you're thinking?
Or what about a multiple of your limit?
What about,
What
Yeah,
about,
that's a better
you've
one.
just hit 150% of your limit. Are you sure you want to continue? Now you've hit 200% of your limit. Are you sure you want to continue?
That would be an option as well.
Because
Yeah,
I may start winning in that intervening time period,
right.
but I'm still getting a message asking me if I want to continue.
Well, you've chosen to hook it to money rather than time, and this approach would be consistent with that.
Yeah, I think that sounds fine. It's about information provided to the player so they can make an informed player choice.
yeah, you're not at 150%, you're
Yeah.
at 200%.
I like that.
Okay, so we've
Yeah.
adapted 12 and 13 to do what we said.
Well, to redo the hand, we've taken out the cooling off period. You can change it up or down.
Right.
ad lib. We've said that when you hit the limit, you get an intervention that says you've hit the limit, do you want to continue? And we've said that you
If you
get a
say yes.
reminder, if you say yes and go on, you get a reminder at, say, 150%, every time you hit another 50% multiple of your limit, you get the same reminder. And those are the consequences to start with, and we study the impact of it.
Okay. Maybe you can put 200% in a different color.
Red.
Yeah, red.
Good. Okay,
All right?
great.
So I think this is important enough that this should be a vote. This is a very big deal, not only for us, but for the industry. So maybe, Commission,
Mr. Chairman, we have 14 and 15.
I'm sorry,
and
excuse me,
it's
forgive
just
me.
in the process, I don't
Yep.
mean to cut you off.
sorry.
Number 14, play management tools are operator-based for each licensee. And again, this goes back to, I recognize that this is a pilot and this is a test, and what it really applies to is our first licensee. But I wasn't sure how to word it other than to make a general statement as that. But it sounds like, much like we are talking about number 1, or changes to number 1, that we could just state that play management tools are operator-based.
Yeah, we don't wanna be in the business of telling, stipulating a system, a slots management system, or anything, or an interface, or anything like that.
Fine with that, fine with.
Fine.
Yeah.
And fine with 15?
Fine with
Yeah.
15.
Great.
You mean they just pick their own manufacturer?
We talked earlier about understanding kind of the test time period and test components. Are you going to come back to that? Come back to us with that, or is that somehow incorporated into this at a later stage?
Into the evaluation period, is that what you mean?
Well, I
Yeah.
guess all this is being incorporated as the
As part of a test.
judge
Yeah.
suggested in regulations with certain, not death period, but sunset period.
I think that immediately we need to work towards building the evaluation component and assigning, coming up with a time frame for the evaluation of this. There's a lot of pieces that we've talked about evaluating and making sure that we pay attention to each of those and allow an appropriate time frame for that.
I think there's a natural, and we spoke about this with Judith Glenn. There's a natural experiment here with Penn opening up earlier than the other 2 licensees, and their willingness to participate in this test already provides that natural test period, in my opinion. I don't know that we need to, fine tune it at this point, but
But he is going to come,
Yep.
priority number
yep.
1 and 2 is going to be to get
To get a
a
time, yep.
research plan together ASAP.
Yep.
Which will tell us a variety of things, including the timeframe. Okay, Commissioner Zuniga, do you want to have the
I'll decline that.
first vote on a play management system?
No, I'll decline that to someone else.
All right. Anybody else want to do it?
To make a motion?
Make a motion?
I'll make a motion that, subject to the promulgation of regulations in the normal course of regulation promulgation, the commission adopts the 15 recommendations contained in the document entitled Play Management Recommendation. It's a part of today's Commissioner's packet. And subject to the changes to those 15 recommendations discussed during the course of this meeting as principles of a play management system the Commission endorses.
Second?
I'll second it. I'm glad you made that motion.
Any further discussion? I mean, basically what we're doing here is voting to adopt a play management system on a test basis with the parameters that we discussed for essentially the first time in the country. All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? The ayes have it unanimously.
Thank you.
Thank you.
May I ask one
A lot of
final
work,
question?
Mark, thank you.
Yeah, sure.
Would it require a vote to adapt this to the responsible gaming framework as well and change the language within that responsible gaming framework to be more definitive on this specific issue?
Let me suggest that based on all the edits, that we just come back and,
Great.
and
Okay.
this discussion, and we'll go to the transcript and all the rest of it, but come back and reread that and,
Okay.
and evaluate it then.
I definitely need the transcript.
Me too.
Thank you,
I saw
Commissioners.
Rick's been taking notes. Let's have a quick break, and then we'll come to our last item. Dennis, thank you for your patience. We are ready to reconvene public meeting number 140, and we are at our last agenda item, and that would be Ombudsman Ziemba.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Chairman and Commissioners, in your packet are draft guidelines and a draft application for the 2015 Community Mitigation Fund. We hope to finalize these documents by December 18th Commission meeting. So for all intents and purposes, today can just be a general overview. You can continue to review what we have in detail here for the 18th. We're going to continue to get input as we go along over the next couple of weeks. Notably, we will be appearing before the upcoming Gaming Policy Advisory Committee meeting, which is scheduled for December 16th at this point, now that we have an official chairman. And I'm very pleased to announce that Dennis DiZoglio has been appointed chair of the Gaming Policy Advisory Committee. Dennis takes over the duties from Rob Hubbard, who ended his term a little bit earlier this year. We really want to thank Rob for all of his service on the committee and thank him for all of his good work. Dennis brings a wealth of relevant experience to the role of chairman, particularly in the areas of municipal experience, planning experience, and his transportation background. Dennis became the executive director of the Merrimack Valley Planning Commission in January 2007. He reports directly to commissioners and responsible for the overall administration of the commission. The commission is comprised of 15-member communities, is over 270 square miles of land, and a population of over 325,000 people. Dennis has over 30 years of community planning experience. The purpose of his commission is to help communities plan for the orderly development of the region and promote community and collaboration for the overall welfare and prosperity of the Valley citizens. Before going to the commission, Dennis was the Deputy General Manager for Planning and Development for the MBTA. Prior to working for the MBTA, he served as the Mayor of Methuen for 6 years, where he was the first Mayor of Methuen in 70 years. He served 3 terms before leaving due to term limits. Before being elected the Mayor of Methuen, he was Planning Director of the City of Peabody. Prior to that, for the City of Taunton. He has a master's degree from Suffolk University and received his bachelor's from Merrimack College. I've had the benefit of working with Dennis for many years. Most recently, I worked with Dennis when we had one of the potential licensees for the Category 2 license up in his region. He provided me a lot of advice and a lot of his community's advice about the potential for gaming in the region. And probably not as recently, it's almost a decade ago now, when I was at Transportation and Dennis was at the T. Dennis, he was probably one of the most well-respected persons in the entire organization, not only for his command of all the issues, but just generally because he's a very good-natured fellow. So I'm very pleased to be able to work with Dennis. Hopefully, I don't know if we actually got the official paperwork, but I'm hopeful that we did. Otherwise, I'm making some sort of a weird announcement. But Dennis, I don't know if you wanted to give a couple of remarks.
Thank you, John, and thank you for that kind introduction. And first, I want to thank the governor and the commission for the opportunity to work with you to help try to make gaming in Massachusetts a success. I think it's clear with the recent referendum and the vote from the citizens that they've made some high standards and they're endorsed this effort. And hopefully, we'll be successful to show them that their confidence in the commission is well taken, and I look forward in my role, and I'm sure my colleagues on the council to help you advance it and make sure it's successful. So I look forward to that, and I'll let the adventure begin.
Great.
Thank
Great.
you.
Great to have you with us.
Thank
It's great.
You know, I mentioned this to you, Dennis, when we talked earlier, but as you know better than anybody, you know, these kinds of advisory commissions can be either just totally pro forma, or they could be substantive. Making them substantive is hard. We are prepared to provide staff support, and we'll do whatever else, you know, you need, but we would really like to figure out a way to make this group of people and the subcommittees really play a substantive role in our deliberations. You can see, you've been here now and heard the kinds of issues that we wrestle with. These are complicated, interesting, important questions that we're dealing with all the time. So, and the more contribution we can get on that, the better. So we will encourage you to be as proactive as you can possibly be, and feel free to ask us to give you the tools, if you need them, to fulfill that commitment of making this thing substantive.
Thank you, I appreciate that. And based on what I saw this afternoon, I can see where we may need to talk more and more about how we can make this thing work.
Yeah, great. Anybody
Now,
else?
Dennis may or may not have to step out before the full Community Mitigation Fund discussion, but I've provided him some of the initial details, and of course, we'll have the much longer discussion probably during the GPAC meeting on December 16th. Did I
Great.
cut you off, Commissioner Stebbins?
Great.
No? Great.
Okay, back to the Community Mitigation Fund proposal. Commissioners, the guidelines before you include components that the commission discussed at its prior meeting. The guidelines specify that the 2015 program funds shall only be used for construction-related activities, as no facilities will yet be operational. They shall be used for impacts that have either occurred or are occurring by February 1st, 2015 application date. Now, on this point, the guidelines specify that the commission reserves the ability to expand the program in future years. This is just the first year of a program that will begin for the years of construction, 3 years of construction, and then the 15 years of the licensing terms. So there'll be tremendous room for growth in this program, evaluation of what direction it should go. But what we're talking about is just the very first guidelines, and the very first guidelines when, frankly, the operational, there's no facility in operation, and the development curve is not significantly underway, at least for the Category 1 facilities. So the guidelines also specify that the commission will benefit from the discussions that will take place over the next year in the committees under the Expanded Gaming Act, namely the Gaming Policy Advisory Committee, with Dennis's assistance, the Subcommittee on Community Mitigation, and then the local Community Mitigation Advisory Committees. And those are the committees that are populated by the surrounding communities, the host community, and others to help advise the Subcommittee on Community Mitigation, the GPAC, and then in turn the Commission about how funds should be expended. So further in these guidelines, we specify that applicants will need to demonstrate how the impact was caused by the construction of a gaming facility, and how the mitigation will be used to remedy the impact. They specify that the commission will...
John, excuse me, you're now talking about the mitigation fund in general. You're not talking about the reserve clause.
No, I'm just talking about the fund in general.
Okay, fine.
I'm going to
Okay.
get into some specifics
Okay.
about the new idea of the
Okay.
reserve. As we discussed at the last meeting, so these are all, what I'm talking about now are just ideas that we've previously discussed that have found their way into this proposal. And Mr. Chairman, as you mentioned, I'll get into detail about the new idea. So the commission will prioritize funds for the mitigation of unanticipated impacts, and will review any host and surrounding community agreements and evaluating requests for funding. And what that does is that we will take a look at what specifics are included in those host community agreements or surrounding community agreements, and we're going to try to address funds to prioritize things that just were not anticipated. As we stated, both Category 1 and Category 2 impacts may be addressed with community mitigation funds. And then overall, the application that we put together, it's meant to be descriptive of the types of mitigation that may be funded, but it is not prescriptive. As I mentioned, over the next few years, especially when facilities are operational, it's likely that communities and others may experience impacts that were not specifically predicted, and we'll try to make evaluations of those impacts and make our decisions based on that. One of the dangers of having a little bit of a more open-ended program is that on the other end of the curve, when we're evaluating proposals, communities may say, well, hey, that wasn't specifically prohibited in the application. But I think that everybody should be on notice that the commission will evaluate whether or not this makes sense in the long-term objectives of the program, even if it wasn't specifically delineated as it's not allowed or allowed in the application form. However, it should be clear from the commission's focus in its past deliberations and the language of the act that the fund should be used to mitigate impacts, and it is not meant as an open-ended resource, where the impacts or the connection to an impact from a facility is either very, very difficult to discern or is tangential at best. What we're really trying to do is determine what the impacts of these facilities are and target those impacts. Indeed, in addition to the commission's evaluation of all of these requests, the committees that we just discussed will also review these requests. So neighbors will look at neighbors' applications, and they'll opine on whether or not they make sense. And if they don't, it could cause some concerns with those neighbors, because they know that, especially over the near term, there's a limited amount of funds that have to go to potentially more than one impact application. So, Mr. Chairman, as you mentioned, in addition to the items that we discussed previously, there is one new proposal that is included in these guidelines that I put up for discussion, and this is the creation of a one-time reserve for the 2015 program. The inaugural 2015 program will be unique for the Community Mitigation Fund, as discussed, because no facilities are yet operational, because significant construction of Category 1 facilities is not yet underway. Communities and others will not experience the same level of impacts compared to future years. As 2015 progresses, the mitigation needs might become clearer. Further, because Category 1 licenses were issued less than a month ago after the referendum, communities, licensees, other parties, and the Commission have not been in a position to debate the use of the funds in the Expanded Gaming Act committees. Given these time constraints, I recommend that the Commission establish a one-time reserve in 2015 for each surrounding community that reached a nearby community agreement with a gaming licensee, and all communities that petition to become a surrounding community. The reserve could be utilized to pay for mitigation of impacts once they become known by communities. Communities would not need to provide support for the use of such funds by February 1st, which could be daunting given the time periods that we're talking about. Instead, they'd be able to provide such information once those impacts become available. In essence, for the reserve funds, it would be a rolling application round. So once communities identified the impacts, they would interact with staff. Staff would then take those recommendations for evaluation to the Commission, and then we would make determinations based on that. Because the Community Mitigation Fund will not see any new deposits until 2017 or perhaps into 2018, we're left with approximately the $17.5 million that is available in the fund currently, and that this will need to last the 2015, 2016, to 2017 application round, and potentially even into 2018, because with at least the WIN licensee expecting that they would become online at the end of 2017, not a tremendous amount of new revenues would flow into the fund by the February 1st, 2018 application round. So in essence, we do have a number of years whereby these funds would need to be utilized to tackle impacts. So where I recommend the use of a fund, I don't recommend the use of a fund that would substantially eat into the $17.5 million that would be available.
So you're talking, so the reserve would be about what, more or less, do you think?
So, for example, if we took and we gave $100,000 per community for each one of the communities that I named,
We reserved.
we reserve that. That would be approximately $2.4 million, because that's 24 communities. I think it's 17 surrounding communities, 3 nearby communities, and 4 petitioners. And that would be about 2.4 million. That would leave approximately $15.1 million for all of those years that I just delineated.
Another calculation also that I had quickly in my mind was the 17.5 million would have to be spread. If you divide that by, say, 3 or 4 years, by which time there will be significant gaming revenues coming because of the operation of the Category 1s, that ratio is about 4.3 million per year. So it's another figure that could also help us think about your order of magnitude, especially because the impacts are also likely going to be felt further to the end of this 4-year period.
That's
not at the beginning.
I think that's exactly right. Yeah, and whether or not we make a decision going into 2016, 2017 to begin opening it up to further operational concerns or in anticipation of operational
Right.
concerns, that could have further impact on the use of these funds.
Right.
So in addition to establishing a reserve, be it $100,000 or some other amount that's determined by the commission, I recommend using that the reserve could also be used for planning purposes, so that communities could have the option of using some of these funds to help plan to either advance local businesses to gain further benefits from a potential facility, or to either lessen or avoid negative consequences from a potential facility. You could utilize, for example, planning funds to try to organize local businesses to see how they could market to take advantage of these facilities. Indeed, there are cross-marketing agreements, especially out in Western Mass, but communities could use these funds to determine what do they need to uniquely position themselves to try to capture some of the additional tourist dollars and other dollars that will be coming to the region. You could use some of these planning resources to see how you want to organize yourselves to get further ancillary developments from the facility. For example, when MAPC did some of the reviews for the Crossroads proposal, a number of different communities talked about the use of planning to attract additional investment into their communities. Specifically, one community had thought about a hotel for a good number of years, but given the size of the community, they weren't able to move forward. But this might have been an opportunity for them to have a new hotel in town, and what would they need to do to attract outside investment. Those are the types of things that could be utilized. In addition, you could use some of the funds to just organize, to try to figure out, to not do the impact analysis, but to try to determine what you need to do to plan to avoid negative consequences. Is there anything that you want to do with your municipal zoning? Is there anything you want to do with your local planning where you could capture appropriate businesses in appropriate locations in your community? There could be a wide-ranging number of impacts. I don't know, Dennis, if you want to talk about that particular aspect.
I think this is a very proactive approach that John is recommending. I know, just to get it very specific, when we were looking at the proposal for Tewksbury, the city of Lowell had expressed interest in the facility going in Tewksbury, but they talked specifically, about connecting the tourist attractions in Lowell to this new facility. But what would that mean? What would be involved? How would you go about connecting the various activities that are happening in Lowell that could have been taken advantage of by those who came to Tewksbury for the facility? That kind of a proactive look at how you can make those connections, I think, would be a very, very good use of these funds to be more proactive in how the whole impact of these developments could be maximized in areas that you're advocating for.
And again, we would want to make sure that whatever planning activity that is directly related to the operation or construction of a gaming facility, it is not just a general resource for planning, but it is connected to these facilities and the potential negative impacts, but the overall potential of these facilities for positive impacts as well.
In that regard, John, would there be, would the idea be that each of the 24 had an identical set-aside, an identical line of credit, or that it would be geared to population or some other mechanism for having non-equal lines of credit?
I think to avoid over-complexity at this point, I would recommend that everyone has the same amount. We had discussed some options of, would surrounding communities get something greater than a nearby community? And then what would happen with the petitioner communities? But I think in terms of the dollar amounts that we're discussing, $100,000, and what a good plan may cost, it probably makes sense for the amounts to be consistent across the board. If you take a look at $100,000 in the context of the overall program, so say we have $18 million that are available flowing into this fund after these facilities become operational, $18 million a year times 15 years, plus the 17.5, $100,000 given at the outset of the program that they could just hold or wait till they have the use that they really want to use during that period of time. I think that in the context of the overall amount of dollars, I think it probably makes sense that 100,000 is probably appropriate, even though that there definitely is a difference between the impacts that will be experienced at a surrounding community versus a nearby community or even a petitioning community.
Well,
I-
yeah, or, yeah. I was thinking in, I don't have an answer to this, and maybe we can talk more a little bit, but the large communities in densely populated areas, surrounding communities, may have different planning needs than smaller communities, surrounding communities in less densely populated areas. Anyway,
Yeah.
we don't have to make a decision.
Wilbraham versus Boston, does it make sense to give
Somerville and
Both.
Hope, and, yeah.
both Wilbraham
Wilbraham
and
and
Boston the
Boston.
same amount of money?
Yeah.
Yeah.
And again,
one-
this 100,000 is split between what do they want to use the funds for to address a specific impact?
Right.
Or for planning.
For planning, right.
And what I didn't specify earlier is that communities are not prohibited from submitting an application for a specific impact if one is known. That may not be as much the case in the 2015 program
Right.
as in future years, but they could submit both. What I would recommend to the commission is that in the 2015 program, if a community submits both a specific impact application and one for a reserve, that we take some of the reserve dollars to pay for the specific impact. So let me give you an example. Say a community says, I have a specific impact of 150,000 that I want you to fund, and they also check the box on the application for the $100,000 reserve. What I would recommend is that the commission would say, okay, community, yes, we've agreed with your impact. You can get your $150,000 for your specific impact, but what we will do is that we're going to but allocate 50% or $50,000 of your reserve to pay for the $150,000. So therefore, they're left with the $50,000 for planning, and then they can utilize the $150,000 in total for their specific impact.
But the impact money is not available for planning, right?
Impact is not available for planning. It was just for a specific impact.
Is that the split that you're recommending,
Yeah.
50/50?
Well, I think that if,
Or it's
I
just
didn't
an
know what
example.
the amount the commission would think
Yeah.
about. If it's 100,000, then I think 50,000 would be a very realistic number.
At a minimum for a study,
Yeah,
or for planning purposes?
yeah. One other point I wanted to mention on the application for the reserve, it is meant to be as administratively not burdensome as possible for communities. So outside of contact information for those 24 communities, all they would have to do is they would basically have to check the box on the front page of the application, send that in to us by February 1st, and then as they develop their plans for planning, or as they develop their plans for specific impacts, then they would either fill out the full application for the specific impact or fill out an additional information sheet that we provide for planning purposes. And so by February 1st, communities that are just getting up to speed on the Community Mitigation Fund would not be overly burdened. But we are required, it is required under the statute that communities submit a written application for funding. So they would have to take the step of sending something in, and my office can make sure that we contact all of those communities to make sure that they get their applications in by February 1st.
Well, I generally think it's a really, I like the idea. I think it's a really innovative idea. It's a good idea. The only thing is, it does sort of strike me, you know, the discrepancy in size issue, the one size fits all. And, you know, we do have one community out there that feels like we're not treating it fairly already. And to have Wilbraham get the same as it, you know, Dennis, what intuitively, what's your sense? Does it, I mean, we could easily structure some kind of a tiered thing. But there, as John says, there's reasons. What intuitively, what feels right to you?
You know, it is a difficult question because communities differ significantly on the capacity that they have. You know, larger communities have staff that can undertake some of these and manage these projects. Smaller communities don't have any capacity. They might look at actually the regional planning agencies to help them advance some of these things. So it really is a difficult question to answer because every community will be different based on the capacity that they've created or have in-house to manage some of these ideas that they may come up with.
But living in the world that you've lived in, does this strike you as sort of inherently unfair? Or are there or does this sort of happen, that there's a sort of a one-size-fits-all in a lot of different kinds of grant programs?
Yeah, you know, it's hard to say, but I mean, larger communities may have more complex kind of analysis, but they might also have some in-house staff that could
To do it, right,
to
right.
do it, and so they might need some external assistance. Smaller communities may not have the capacity, but they'll have more funds for a smaller issue that maybe they'd like to advance. So it could work out. It's just not a very
Yeah.
definable division between, say, a small and large. Everyone will be different, and maybe that's part of the evaluation is in the needs section, discuss, say, the capacity issue to verify or to determine that it does make some sense for that amount of money to be used for this study because of, say, limitations of the community, or maybe because of the capacity the community has.
I think Dennis makes a good point. I talked about this with John. I do like, for the commission's sanity, that we do keep it at a flat level amount, and understanding that every surrounding community agreement was different. You know, some got more money than other money, you know, all the variables that we found in each of the surrounding community agreements. So I think for our own sanity in managing this program, just here's the flat amount. Some of it may get credited, as John mentioned, to a mitigation program. Some of it may be because I haven't got the capacity in-house, as opposed to a bigger city, which, you know, they have, you know, a dozen people that focus on this stuff all the time. You know, two quick points I want to make, John, and we talked about this, is one, maybe the introduction of new surrounding communities into the equation at some point, for whatever reason. But also, you know, my interest, again, getting back to the environment of different surrounding community agreements as structured by each of our licensees, that even though I know, and Dennis can appreciate this, a lot of municipalities, their budgets are really strapped, but I am looking or want to see some evidence of the community asking for the $100,000 to have some skin in the game. That's either taking some of the money that they're getting already from the licensee, or it's a dedication of staff, it's, you know, staff time as a resource, or it's any number of other things, or it ties in concretely to a plan and we're just not seeing a request for money. So that would be some onus that I would put back on the surrounding communities or neighboring communities, is if you can afford to put skin in the game, what is it?
You really do need an active participant. You need more of a dialogue versus a monologue. And I think that the skin in the game is really, it's hard. Community sometimes wins at that, but at the same time, it makes them play. I mean, they when they invest something, now they're part of the process. And I think that's a great suggestion. I think that's the way you're going to get something concrete accomplished versus maybe something that gets on a shelf. And in my business, I hate putting any plan on a shelf, but if they pay for it, if they're part of the process, there's less likelihood that it will end up on the shelf.
So are you suggesting, Commissioner Stebbins, that maybe part of the application, not getting the 100 put into the reserve, But if you want to spend some of it when you apply for it, you would have to tell us how you got.
Yeah,
some.
it's not for the stage of just checking the box and I
Yeah.
want the money set aside, but when I go in after
Right,
that
okay.
$100,000. And
Yeah.
again, I think to keep John sane and with the level of gray hair that he has now and not anymore, flat him out, but show us what your skin in the game is. And, it can, local communities can get creative and say, I'm going to give you part of my part-time planner's time or whatever their commitment is.
In-kind service, yeah, it doesn't have to be a flat dollar amount specifically for those poor communities. What we've talked about with the MMA, for example, planning dollars are scarce, and especially some of the smaller communities, they might not be able to take advantage if they had to do the match. So, but if they, as Dennis and you point out, Commissioner, if they have the opportunity to, if they put the skin in the game, that's important to planning.
And it may allow them to go
For
to other resources too.
For a second there, I thought, were you suggesting something like matching funds? No, not really, not necessarily.
Not matching.
Okay.
I wouldn't expect a lot of communities,
No.
smaller communities, to come up with $100,000 on their own. But, if some evidence, and Dennis
Understood.
said it well, have some skin in the game.
Yeah, one thing I just want to clarify, because I've talked about a couple different things. The reserve, which is allocated for that universe of 24 communities,
Right.
you do not have to be a surrounding community to apply for the mitigation fund.
Correct.
So there are communities out there that are not designated communities, but they might have an impact, a specific impact. They can apply for that specific impact funding. But in terms of these planning dollars, those are allocated just for the universe that we've identified.
Correct.
Yeah.
I'm
Yeah.
still, I hear you, and I just need to think about this more, maybe play with some numbers, but I'm still concerned that the Chairman's Boston-Wilbraham distinction, I understand that Boston, say, has much more staff support than Wilbraham. On the other hand, the planning dollars, $100,000 to plan for a Boston project is a tiny component of what's necessary to plan for a typical Wilbraham component.
But let's not forget something that's at play here.
And so I just wonder if there isn't some piece of this that ought to be geared to community size or the nature of the planning effort or something,
Well,
despite the gray hair that it would engender.
Well, let's not forget that there's surrounding community agreements that have dealt with, at least in theory, the big, two parties came out of these, whether by arbitration or agreement, with what's at least in theory supposed to be the larger impacts.
Yeah. In most cases, that's true.
That's right. And it's in theory, and it's actually their best guess, right? Because the impacts are not even, here. But that's a very important component that's already out there in the legislation, et cetera. There's a case to be made that this comes and backfills, in a way, some of that process, or piggybacks a little bit. Anyway.
Okay, we don't need to, we're going to decide this next week, right?
Sure.
Did you want to decide it now?
No?
Oh,
No, the 18th.
18th.
Yep.
Yeah, sorry, next meeting.
Yep.
Yeah, so we don't have.
But we'll seek the advice of the GPAC in between, and we'll come back to the
Right.
commission
Okay.
At that later date.
Okay.
John, just to add one final note while we're talking about, on the overall application, you asked for either the packet to include a letter of support from the licensee and/or the licensee will review it after it's received.
That's right.
So finding either or,
Yep. In essence, we're going to ask each of the licensees for every application for funding. So the letter is absolutely not necessary, and I try to specify that in the guidelines. But if they wanted to seek the support of the licensee in sending their application, they can do so.
and
But,
just short circuits the
Yeah,
step.
but we will go out to every licensee and ask them what their thoughts are about, very similar to our surrounding community process, what their determination, what their thoughts are on the matter.
All right.
Okay. Anything else? Interesting, good stuff.
Yeah,
I think that brings us to the end of our agenda. Anything else?
Good.
Do I have a motion?
Thank you, Dennis.
Thank you, Dennis.
Thank you, Dennis.
Welcome
Thank you.
aboard.
Move to adjourn?
Second?
Second.
Unanimous.